Welcome! In this series of videos, we will cover the design and implementation of a project, from initial design through coding and development to testing, using the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look again at the application to help track resource management of staff. In our last video on resource management, we demonstrated an application. This application takes quite a simple approach to keeping track of the resources within your team. In other words, the time that the staff spends on different tasks or activities. The application can support multiple teams. If we load the team data, select our team, then the information will come up on screen. We have two parts of the screen holding the task information. The top part shows a grid, showing 6 months worth of information. When we recorded the last video, it was in February. As we are now in March, the information for February has been removed, and we're now showing the 4 weeks in March and all the way up to August. As we have not saved the information for March yet, the information in the detailed section below is still showing the February information. This is a bonus, as you can always refer back to it when populating the March information. If we put some holidays in for the staff, for example, on John Smith, we'll put week 2 in as holiday, setting that to the task. For Jane Smythe, we will mark week 3. And for the final member of the team, we will mark them in week 4. Having populated some information, we can now save this. If we click the Save and Generate HTML button, it will regenerate the bottom grid. The bottom grid is an embedded HTML control. This now shows the updated information for the second week in March, third week in March, and the final week in March. In addition, what I didn't show in the last video was clicking on the Summary Radio button. Clicking on the Summary Radio button gives you a breakdown per member of the team. This differentiates between allocated and unallocated time. So we can see for the first week in March, we have certainly some time allocated for John Smith, but none for Jane or Tom. This, from a team leader's perspective, allows them to see over the next 6 months when there are gaps, when there is free resource that could be allocated to a project. So what we're going to cover in this video is how we achieve this in code. This is within the PowerBasic Windows compiler. So let's have a look at the code. As we can see from the beginning of the application, we have a number of include files. The bulk standard Windows 32 API, common controls, and PB forms. Fairly standard for a PB forms application. Additionally, we're pulling in MyLittleGrid include file and the static link library that encompasses MyLittleGrid. This static link library is used to create the grid at the top of our screen. We're also using another static link library, which is the one that is used to generate the spinning gear wheels, just to indicate to the user that something is happening in the background. We have 5 other files which are included. The button plus, which is used to put the graphics on the buttons. Tooltips, which as the name suggests is to allow you to generate tooltips on objects on screen. We have an HTML help. We have 2 additional include files which are used to help display the embedded HTML control. If we now look at PBMain. The first command in PBMain is the PB forms initialize controls. This is used for applications whose dialogues have been generated by PB forms. We're dimensioning a global array which we're using to keep track of our staff. This I have coded up to keep track of 200 staff. If this number is too small, just increase it to the number of staff in your team. We then have 3 functions called. One to generate the months for the next 6 months, one to prep the task colors, and one to prep the HTML colors. If we look first of all at the function that prepares the task colors. These are the colors used within the grid. And these are all using the inbuilt RGB color constants. These I have matched to the colors for HTML to get the best match between the colors so that they will appear as close as possible to each other, so that the green showing for unallocated in the grid matches the green showing in the HTML control at the bottom of the screen. And then we go to the dialog itself. Further down the code are 2 lines of code. These are key to being able to allow us to display an HTML control, an embedded web page at the bottom of the screen. The first, the OCX name, we're having as Shell Explorer. Then we're initializing ATL. We'll see more on this further down the code. Next, we're doing our initialization of the MyLittleGrid grid control. Then the usual dialog new, followed by all the objects that appear on the dialog. Once we have specified all the controls that appear on the PB forms, we then have the calls to button plus. This is to display the icons on our buttons. After that is the specification of MyLittleGrid, where it appears on screen, how many columns it has and how wide each column is. And now we have the embedded browser control. This control add statement is the command which adds our embedded control to the bottom of the screen. All we need to do then is to capture the handle of that control. Then we're calling 2 routines within the include library. One to get the control and one to make it dispatch. This populates this variant variable, which we're then using for this set command. Then all we need to do is to specify the URL which we want to display in that page. Initially, when the program loads, it's loading a blank resource management page, which is held within the data folder, resource manager blank.htm. When a team is loaded and the HTML control is regenerated, these are saved out to these files and then displayed inside the HTML control. This allows you to publish these HTML files to any website you wish. And the final command that navigates to and displays on screen the web page is this one here, this object call. Next, we're doing some finishing up on the grid. This is to set up each of the worksheets. In this case, since we have 6 months, we have one worksheet for each month. We're then adding the name of the worksheet using this function here. This is a month name which was generated right at the beginning of our code when we called the generate months routine. We're defaulting to the very first tab on the assumption that the user would want to start at the current month. And then we're putting the headers in for each of the columns within each of the grids. And finally, we're setting up the color slots. So if we now have a look at the event handler, the callback function. When dealing with a MyLittleGrid, you will need this local variable set up as a pointer at the beginning of your function. This is then referred to in the notification section to pick up which events have occurred within the grid. For example, the right click to pick up the little menu and the setting of allocated tasks. And within the WM size event is the code which handles when the screen has been resized, maximized, minimized, or just generally made bigger. And we're calling this function to resize our screen based on the scale, i.e. make it bigger or smaller, or moving for the buttons, vertical and horizontal. And we're calling the repaint as the last command. Then in our initialize dialog function is where we set up all the tooltips. And finally, we have the WM notify event. This is where we handle the events on the MyLittleGrid. We can check to make sure which grid is actually being clicked on. In this particular application, there is only one grid, but this allows you to differentiate between perhaps grid 1 and grid 2 if you had 2 grids on the screen. And like many other things, each of these has a particular event. For example, a multi-cell change, where the user has multi-selected cells. For example, they've selected all the weeks or all the weeks in a month, and you wish to do something for the whole section. We can pick up the column selected, the row selected, and the end row and end column selected. This allows us to set a number of cells at one go. We have other events to handle a column selection change and a row selection change. And here is a right-click menu. This picks up when the user has right-clicked on the grid. This allows us to pick up which menu item they pick, what column the mouse is actually in, and what row the mouse is actually in. This is followed by the code which handles what goes in to the cell or cells in the My Little Grid. Is it going to be unallocated, or is it being allocated to a task? When the user clicks on the Save and Generate HTML, at this point it looks through each cell in the grid. It is then going to generate from scratch an HTML page to match what we see up here. This is a very straightforward HTML document, and we're using the background color of each of the cells in a table to match the colors in the top grid. Additionally, we have menus on the dialog. We have a resource menu, which will allow you to add an extra resource. In other words, another member to your team. We also have an option to delete a resource. So if, for example, Tom Jones leaves the team, we can apply that change. This would then mark him as deleted. And if we save and generate the HTML, that would remove the user entirely from the top grid and from the bottom grid as well. The additional menu item is security. The idea behind this is to allow other members of the team to have write access to this grid. When the application loads, it picks up the sign-on name by whoever you signed on to the domain as. So if one of the members of the team is acting as a delegate for the team leader, you merely have to add them to this list and change their permission level to read-write. Other members of the team will be able to actually run the application and to load the team document, but it will be read-only. So the code sections to handle what we just looked at are down here. We have the load data. This allows you to load up the team data based on what the user has selected. And we're using the inbuilt display open file call. This allows the user to select a team file from a specific folder. And we have this call here to the spinner initialization. This displays the gear wheel while the data is being loaded. It's always good to give a user some kind of feedback on the screen to indicate that the application is doing something and has not actually hung. And the last event we will look at is the one that generates the HTML file. The very first thing it does is to save the configuration information locally by calling the save config function. Following that, there is a generate page function. This generates the HTML page. We then reload the data and recursively regenerate to pick up any deleted resources. And we generate both the page and the summary page at the same time. So if we load up the team data, select the team, and then save and generate. And then we can see the detail or the summary straight away. There is no delay in generating it because these files have already been manufactured. So I will be including the source file on the zip on the website. So feel free to download it and try the application out. This is a fairly simple application to allow a team manager to keep track of their team's resource and to allow them to identify gaps where the team is not fully deployed. Currently, it only keeps track of up to 6 months worth of data. However, it could be extended to go beyond that quite easily. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.